25 centuries ago, in a glittering Greek city by the sea, a lonely aristocrat turned his back on power and crowds, climbed into the mountains, and dared to say something that still unsettles us, that everything we love is already slipping away. His name was Heraclitus, and though almost no one understood him in his lifetime, the fire he kindled in those mountains has never stopped burning. Heraclitus was born around 500 before the Common Era in Ephesus, one of the richest and most dazzling cities of the ancient Greek world. He came into a noble family, so noble that it was said he was heir to a kind of priestly kingship, a sacred office passed down through his bloodline. Yet from his earliest years there was something in him that stood apart, a proud and solitary spirit that could not bend easily to the games of men. He looked at the wealth and bustle of Ephesus, at its harbor crowded with ships and its temple gleaming among the greatest wonders of the world, and he felt a strange distance from it all. Even as a boy, it seems, he carried within him a question that the noise of the city could never answer. Power was offered to him, and this is one of the first strange stories we hear about his life. According to the ancient accounts, Heraclitus surrendered the hereditary royal title that was his by birth, handing it over to his younger brother without apparent regret. To a Greek of his age, this was almost unthinkable, for such honors were the very meaning of a noble life. But he seemed to see in that crown only a heavier chain, a distraction from something far more urgent that was calling to him. In that quiet act of refusal, we glimpse the whole shape of the man, someone who would trade the visible glory of the world for an invisible truth that almost no one else could see. Even his own family, it seems, could not fully understand the strange path he had chosen. Ephesus, in his day, was a city of restless energy, of trade and politics and endless human striving. Its citizens argued in the assembly, worshipped in the great temple of Artemis, and prided themselves on their cleverness and their customs. Heraclitus moved among them like a stranger in his own home, watching their passions with a mixture of sorrow and scorn. He saw people chasing after wealth and reputation as though these things were solid and lasting, never noticing how the ground was shifting beneath their feet. The tragedy, he sensed, was not that men suffered, but that they slept through their own lives, awake in body yet dreaming in soul. And so he began to withdraw into himself, watching, listening, and preparing to speak. Solitude became his chosen path, and here the ancient sources paint an unforgettable picture. They tell us that Heraclitus grew so weary of the company of men that he withdrew from the city altogether and went to live in the mountains. There, it was said, he wandered among the peaks and wild places, feeding himself on grasses and plants, alone with his thoughts and the turning of the seasons. Whether every detail is true or not, the image carries a deep emotional truth about him. A man who felt more at home with silence and stone than with the chatter of the marketplace. His loneliness was not an accident, but a decision, the price he was willing to pay to think clearly. In that wilderness, he found the clarity that the crowded streets had always denied him. One single book carried his immortality across the centuries, though it survives now only in broken pieces. He is said to have composed a single work, later given the title On Nature, and to have deposited it in the great temple of Artemis for safekeeping. This was a solemn and deliberate act, entrusting his deepest thoughts to a goddess rather than to the fickle judgment of the crowd. The book was famous in antiquity for its difficulty, written in dense and oracular sentences that seemed to hide as much as they revealed. Even the greatest minds struggled with it, and from this struggle came the nickname that followed him through the centuries, Heraclitus the Obscure. Whoever wished to understand him would have to climb toward him, and few ever did. Obscurity was not a failure of his writing, but in a sense its very purpose. Heraclitus wrote in riddles and paradoxes because he believed the truth itself was hidden, that nature loves to conceal itself and will not yield to lazy minds. He scattered his insights like sparks, each sentence a small fire meant to kindle thought rather than to hand over easy answers. The reader was not to be a passive vessel, but an active seeker, forced to wrestle with each phrase until its meaning suddenly blazed forth. In this, he resembled the oracle at Delphi, which, as he himself said, neither speaks plainly nor conceals, but gives a sign. He wanted to awaken minds, not to lull them, and for this he was widely misunderstood. At the very heart of his vision stood a single overwhelming idea, that all things are in ceaseless motion and nothing ever truly stays the same. Everything flows, everything is in flux, the whole world is a river that never stops moving. Where others saw solid objects and stable states, Heraclitus saw processes, transformations, an endless becoming with no rest. The mountain, the sea, the human body, the city itself, all of these were not things but events, slow rivers of change disguised as permanence. To see the world truly, he believed, was to see that stillness is an illusion and that change is the only eternal thing. This single insight would echo through philosophy for the next 25 centuries. Picture a flowing river, his most famous image, one that has echoed down the ages as among the greatest sayings in all of philosophy. You cannot step into the same river twice, he taught, for fresh waters are ever flowing in upon you. At first, this sounds simple, almost like a poet's fancy, but its implications are staggering and even a little frightening. The river you stepped into a moment ago is already gone, carried away downstream, replaced by waters that were somewhere else entirely. And if this is true of the river, then it is true of everything, true of your friends, your city, your own body, and the very self that imagines it remains the same. No image in all ancient thought has proved more haunting or more enduring than this. If everything flows, then even you are not who you were. And this is where his philosophy touches the rawest nerve of human feeling. The person reading these words is not the same person who was born decades ago, nor even quite the same as an hour past. Every cell, every thought, every feeling is in motion, being replaced, being transformed, slipping quietly into the past. There is something dizzying and sorrowful in this, a sense that we are always losing ourselves even as we live. And yet, there is also a strange liberation in it, for if nothing is fixed, then nothing is finally trapped, and every moment carries the possibility of becoming something new. This is why his teaching wounds and comforts us in the very same breath. Fire was the element he chose to symbolize this restless, ever-changing reality, and the choice was profound. Where earlier thinkers had named water or air as the root of all things, Heraclitus named fire, because fire is never a thing, but always an activity. A flame seems to have a shape, yet it is nothing but constant transformation, consuming and creating in the same instant, never still for even a heartbeat. The whole cosmos, he said, is an ever-living fire, kindling in measures and going out in measures, burning according to a hidden order. In fire, he found the perfect image of a world that exists only by perpetually becoming, a universe that is more like a dance than a stone. Nothing could have captured his restless universe more perfectly than a living flame. Beneath all this ceaseless change, however, Heraclitus insisted there was a hidden order, and he gave it a name that would echo through all Western thought. He called it the Logos, a Greek word that means word, reason, measure, and account all at once. The Logos was the deep rational principle that governed the flowing of all things, the invisible law by which the fire burned in due proportion. Though everything changed, it did not change chaotically, but according to this eternal measure that held the cosmos together. To understand the Logos was to understand the secret harmony beneath the surface of a restless world, and this, for Heraclitus, was the highest wisdom a human being could ever hope to reach in a single lifetime. What wounded him most deeply was that this Logos was available to all, yet almost no one troubled to listen. Though the Logos is common to everyone, he lamented, most people live as though they had a private understanding of their own. They move through the world half asleep, he said, hearing without comprehending, present in body but absent in mind. There is real anguish in these words, the pain of a man who has glimpsed something luminous and cannot make others see it. He was not merely proud or bitter, though he could be both, but genuinely grieved that the truth lay open before all eyes and still went unnoticed. And so his greatest gift became for him a source of lifelong sorrow and a deep and aching solitude. Appositives, he insisted, are secretly one, and this startling insight shocked and puzzled his contemporaries. Heraclitus taught that appositives are not truly separate, but secretly one, bound together in a hidden tension. The road up and the road down, he said, are one and the same road. Day and night, life and death, waking and sleeping, these are not enemies but partners in a single dance, each defining and depending on the other. Disease makes health sweet, hunger makes fullness good, weariness makes rest precious, and without one pole the other could not even exist. In this way, the world's contradictions were resolved into a deeper and more beautiful harmony. What looked like contradiction, he saw, was in truth the very structure of the world. Strife and conflict, which most people fear and lament, he boldly praised as the father of all things. War is common to all, he declared, and strife is justice, and all things come to be through strife and necessity. This was a hard and even terrifying teaching, but it flowed directly from his vision of a world made of tension and change. Just as a bow and a lyre gain their power from the pull of opposing forces, so the whole cosmos is held together by the straining of appositives against one another. To wish for a world without conflict was, in his eyes, to wish for a world without existence, for it is the very war of appositives that keeps the fire of reality alive. To him, peace without tension was not harmony at all, but merely death and dissolution. Harmony, for Heraclitus, was therefore not the absence of tension, but its perfect balance, and this idea has a haunting beauty. The hidden harmony, he said, is stronger than the visible one, meaning that the deepest order lies beneath the surface, where opposing forces hold each other in check. He compared the world to a musical instrument whose strings must be stretched taut to make a beautiful sound. Too little tension and there is no music, too much and the string snaps, but in the living balance between them, harmony is born. So it is with the cosmos, whose unseen equilibrium of clashing forces produces the ordered beauty of all that exists. This one idea alone would have been enough to secure his place among the immortals. Toward the gods and the old religion, he turned an attitude as bold and unsettling as everything else about him. Heraclitus had little patience for the empty rituals and superstitions of his fellow Greeks, mocking those who prayed to statues as though they were talking to houses. He scorned the purification rites that tried to wash away blood with more blood, calling such practices as foolish as trying to clean off mud with mud. Yet he was no simple unbeliever, for he sensed a genuine divinity in the Logos that ruled the world, a wisdom deeper than any myth. His quarrel was not with the sacred itself, but with the shallow and mechanical ways that people tried to grasp it. He sought the sacred not in idols and rites, but in the burning reason behind the world. Not even the famous poets and thinkers of Greece were spared his sharp and cutting judgment. He said that Homer deserved to be beaten and thrown out of the poetry contests, and he heaped scorn on the learned men of his day for having much knowledge but little understanding. Much learning, he insisted, does not teach a person to have wisdom, for one might know countless facts and still miss the single truth that mattered. This fierce independence made him enemies and won him a reputation for arrogance, yet behind it lay a burning conviction that most human knowledge was a collection of trivia that never touched the deep. He wanted not the accumulation of facts, but the awakening of the soul. He measured a mind not by how much it held, but by how deeply it had understood. Few things stirred his contempt like the crowd and its opinions, a scorn so intense that it isolated him further. Heraclitus once said that the best people choose one thing above all others, everlasting glory among mortals, while the many stuff themselves like cattle. He believed that one truly excellent person was worth more than 10,000 ordinary ones, a judgment that strikes us as harsh and even cruel. Yet this was not mere snobbery, for his scorn fell hardest on the powerful and the celebrated, not only on the poor. What he despised was not humble birth, but sleeping souls, the refusal of people at every level of society to wake up and truly think. His scorn was aimed not at the humble, but at the sleeping soul wherever it was found. There is a story, perhaps only a legend, that reveals the loneliness at the core of his life. It is said that when the citizens of Ephesus banished his friend Hermodorus, the best man among them, Heraclitus was filled with disgust at their small-minded envy. The Ephesians, he raged, would do well to hang themselves, every grown man of them, and leave the city to the beardless boys, for they had driven out the one person who stood above the rest. Whether the tale is exact or not, it captures the bitterness of a man who watched mediocrity triumph over excellence. He had given up a throne for wisdom, and in return he received only the spectacle of a foolish and jealous crowd. Few sayings in all antiquity carry such raw and wounded feeling as this bitter cry. Politics and public life he abandoned with the same decisiveness that marked his surrender of the crown. Invited, so the story goes, to give laws to his city, he refused because the city was already in the grip of a corrupt constitution. Instead, he was seen playing dice with children in the temple of Artemis, and the astonished citizens gathered to watch. He turned to them and asked, why were they surprised? Was it not better, he said, to do this than to take part in their crooked politics? In this strange and touching scene, we see a philosopher who preferred the honest play of children to the dishonest games of grown men. In that small gesture lay a whole philosophy of contempt for corruption and pretense. Down the centuries, a haunting nickname attached itself to him, the Weeping Philosopher, and it tells us how the world remembered his spirit. Where Democritus was imagined as the laughing philosopher, forever amused by human folly, Heraclitus was pictured as the one who wept, overcome with sorrow at the blindness and suffering of mankind. Ancient writers loved to pair them as two masks of wisdom, one laughing and one crying at the same tragic spectacle. Though this image is surely a simplification, it reaches something real in his writings, the note of grief that runs beneath his fierce and lofty words. He saw too much and felt too much to meet the human condition with a smile. And perhaps, in a world so full of blindness, weeping was the only honest response. Even the human soul, he sensed, was hidden and unfathomably deep, beyond the reach of any map. You could not discover the limits of the soul, he wrote, though you traveled every road, so deep is its measure. This is one of the most beautiful and mysterious things ever said about the inner life of a person. He sensed that within each of us lies an abyss of depth, a vastness that no amount of searching can fully map or exhaust. The soul, like the cosmos, was bound up with fire and the logos, capable of wisdom when it was dry and luminous, but dulled and drowned when it grew wet with drink and excess. No thinker before him had ever spoken of the inner life of a person with such awe and such trembling humility. On the matter of the soul and how to live, Heraclitus offered warnings that still ring true across the millennia. A dry soul, he taught, is wisest and best, by which he meant a soul kept clear and bright like a steady flame, undimmed by indulgence. He observed how a drunken man stumbles and must be led by a boy, his soul grown moist and clouded, no longer master of itself. In this vivid image, he captured a whole ethics of self-command, the idea that wisdom requires keeping the inner fire burning cleanly. To lose oneself in appetite and excess was to let the light within grow dim, to sink from waking clarity into a kind of living sleep. To keep the soul dry and luminous was for him the whole art of living well. Character and destiny were bound together in one of his most quoted and profound sayings. A person's character is their fate, he declared, in a phrase so compact that it has been pondered for thousands of years. He meant that we are not merely the playthings of external gods or blind chance, but that the shape of our inner selves determines the shape of our lives. The way we habitually think and feel and choose becomes, over time, the very destiny that seems to befall us. In this single sentence, he placed an enormous weight of responsibility upon the human heart, suggesting that to change one's fate, one must first do the far harder work of changing oneself. Rarely has so much moral weight been placed on so few and simple words.
Life and death, waking and sleeping, youth and age, all flowed into one another in his vision without any firm boundary. The living and the dead, the waking and the sleeping, the young and the old are the same, he said, for these change into those, and those change back into these. It was a thought designed to dissolve our ordinary certainties, to show that the walls we build between opposite states are far thinner than we imagine. Death was not simply an ending, but a transformation, one more turning in the endless cycle of the ever-living fire. In this teaching, there was both a chill and a strange consolation, the sense that we belong to a process far larger than our brief individual lives. He wanted us to feel that we belong to a single vast process greater than ourselves. Vast and impersonal grandeur entered his thought through the immortality of the cosmos itself. This world, he said, the same for all, was made by no god and no man, but always was and is and shall be an ever-living fire, kindling in measures and going out in measures. Here Heraclitus swept aside the old stories of creation and declared the universe eternal, without beginning or end, forever burning according to its inner law. There is something both cold and magnificent in this vision, a cosmos that needs no maker because it has always existed and always transformed itself. The human mind, contemplating this eternal fire, is lifted out of its small concerns into the presence of something boundless. Contemplating this eternal fire, the small and frightened self is lifted beyond itself. For all his severity, there are moments in his fragments that glow with unexpected tenderness and wonder. He spoke of the sun as new every day, forever renewing itself, a small daily miracle that most people never pause to notice. He found the divine hidden even in humble places, reportedly telling visitors who found him warming himself at a kitchen stove that here too the gods were present. In such glimpses, we see that his philosophy was not only grim, but shot through with a deep reverence for the living world. Beneath all his sorrow and scorn, there ran a hidden current of awe, a sense that reality, rightly seen, was luminous and holy. Beneath all his sorrow, there ran a hidden current of wonder at the living world. Plato, who came a century after him, wrestled with the challenge of Heraclitus and was permanently marked by it. Through his teacher's teacher and the followers of Heraclitus, Plato absorbed the disturbing idea that the world of the senses is in perpetual flux and can never be truly known. This very problem drove Plato to seek a realm of changeless forms beyond the flowing world, an eternal order of truth that the shifting senses could never reach. In a real sense, the whole towering edifice of Platonic philosophy was built as a response to the Heraclitean vision of universal change. The Weeping Philosopher of Ephesus thus became one of the hidden foundations of Western thought. In this way, the sage of Ephesus became a secret foundation of all Western thought.
Aristotle, the great systematizer, took Heraclitus seriously even when he disagreed with him. He recorded and discussed the Ephesians' doctrines, puzzling over the claim that opposites could be identical and that all things were in motion. Aristotle found some of these teachings troubling, even accusing Heraclitus of violating the basic laws of logic by asserting that a thing could both be and not be. Yet, by preserving and debating these ideas, Aristotle helped ensure that they would survive and continue to provoke thinkers for centuries. Even in disagreement, the greatest minds of Greece could not simply ignore the strange fire that Heraclitus had kindled. Even where he objected, Aristotle could not simply set the strange fire aside. Generations later, the Stoics embraced Heraclitus as a kind of spiritual ancestor and carried his fire forward. They took up his idea of the logos and made it the center of their whole philosophy, seeing the universe as governed by a divine rational principle that ordered all events. From him they drew the vision of a cosmos periodically consumed and renewed in fire, and the conviction that wisdom meant living in harmony with the rational order of nature. Through the Stoics, the thought of Heraclitus reached across the Roman world, shaping emperors and slaves alike who sought to align their souls with the Logos. His lonely mountain wisdom became a comfort to millions. Through them, his lonely mountain wisdom became a comfort to emperors and slaves alike. Diogenes Laertius, the ancient collector of philosophers' lives, preserved many of the vivid stories that let us glimpse the man behind the fragments. Writing centuries after Heraclitus died, he gathered the anecdotes, the sayings, and the legends that had grown up around the Ephesian sage. It is largely through his pages that we know of the surrendered kingship, the retreat to the mountains, the dice game in the temple, and the strange manner of his death. We must read such accounts with caution, for legend and fact are tangled together in them. Yet without this loving preservation, the human portrait of Heraclitus would have vanished entirely. We owe our very image of the Weeping Philosopher to those who cared enough to remember him. Strange and symbolic as his life itself, the manner of his death is described by the ancient sources in vivid detail. They say that in his later years, Heraclitus fell ill with dropsy, a disease that filled his body with excess water, a cruel fate for the philosopher of dry souls and living fire. Seeking a cure, he supposedly buried himself in cow dung, hoping its warmth would draw out the moisture that was drowning him from within. The story may well be a later invention, perhaps mocking or perhaps symbolic, but it lingers because it seems to echo his own teachings. The man who had warned against the wet soul died, it was said, overwhelmed by the very moisture he had feared. It was a cruel end for the philosopher who had praised the dry and fiery soul above all.
Something poignant lingers in that final image, whether or not it is historically true. Heraclitus had taught that the dry and fiery soul was wisest, that clarity came from keeping the inner flame burning clean and bright. To imagine him dying of an excess of water, his living fire finally quenched, is to see his philosophy written into the very shape of his end. Perhaps the ancients told the story precisely because it felt fitting, a final paradox for the philosopher of paradox, a last unity of opposites in which the prophet of fire was extinguished by water. In death, as in life, he became a living emblem of the very truths he had spoken. For long centuries after antiquity, Heraclitus survived only in scattered quotations, and yet those fragments never lost their power. His book was lost, as so many ancient works were lost, and all that remained were the sentences that other writers had copied into their own pages. But these broken pieces, perhaps 100 or so, shone with such intensity that they continued to fascinate every generation that encountered them. There is something fitting in this, that the philosopher of impermanence should himself survive only in fragments, his wholeness scattered by the very flux he described. And yet, like sparks that stubbornly refused to die, his words kept catching fire again and again in new minds across the ages. In the modern age, Heraclitus found some of his most passionate admirers, none more fervent than Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche revered the Ephesian as one of the few philosophers he could love without reservation, praising his fearless embrace of becoming, of change, of a world without fixed being. In Heraclitus, he found a kindred spirit who could gaze upon the terrifying flux of existence and affirm it rather than flee from it into comforting illusions. The idea of a cosmos as an innocent play of creation and destruction, a child moving pieces in a game, enchanted Nietzsche and shaped his own vision. Across 2,500 years, the lonely fire of Ephesus lit an answering flame in the heart of a modern rebel. Hegel, too, claimed Heraclitus as an essential forebear of his own vast philosophy of change and contradiction. There is no proposition of Heraclitus, Hegel famously declared, that he had not taken up into his own logic. In the Heraclitean unity of opposites, in the idea that reality moves forward through the tension and resolution of contradictions, Hegel saw the ancient seed of his own dialectical method. The notion that being and nothing pass into one another, that becoming is the truth of them both, seemed to him to have been first grasped by the sage of Ephesus. Thus, the obscure fragments of a solitary Greek became a cornerstone in one of the grandest philosophical systems ever built. Even in the 20th century, thinkers like Martin Heidegger returned to Heraclitus in search of a wisdom that modern philosophy had lost. Heidegger brooded over the Heraclitean fragments, especially the sayings about the logos and about nature's love of concealment, finding in them a more original way of thinking about being. He believed that these ancient words held clues to questions that later philosophy had forgotten how to ask, and he spent years meditating on their hidden depths. For Heidegger, Heraclitus was not a primitive figure to be surpassed, but an early master whose insights we had scarcely begun to understand. The fire kindled in Ephesus still gave light to the most difficult thinkers of the modern world. Far beyond philosophy, his influence reached into science, poetry, and the way ordinary people understand their very lives. His vision of a world in perpetual process anticipated, in a strange way, the modern scientific picture of a universe of energy and constant transformation. Poets and writers across the centuries have drawn on his river and his fire, his sense that all things pass and nothing abides. Even people who have never read a word of his work carry his ideas unknowingly whenever they say that you can never go back, that everything changes, that life is a flowing stream. His thought has seeped so deeply into our culture that it has become part of the very air we breathe. What makes Heraclitus endure when so many ancient thinkers have faded is the raw, emotional truth at the center of his philosophy. He spoke to the deepest human experiences, to loss and impermanence, to the ache of watching everything we love slip away. But he did not merely mourn this flux. He tried to teach us how to see it as beautiful, as the very fire and music of existence. In his fragments we find not only cold metaphysics, but a way of facing the terror of change with clear and open eyes. He offers a hard consolation, not the false promise that nothing will be lost, but the deeper wisdom that change itself is the nature of things, and that in it lies a strange and burning beauty. This is the hard and honest consolation that has kept his fragments alive for ages. To read Heraclitus today is to feel the shock of encountering a mind that saw, 25 centuries ago, truths we are still struggling to accept. He looked into the heart of reality and found no solid ground, only a ceaseless flowing, a fire forever kindling and dying, a harmony of warring opposites held in delicate balance. He paid for this vision with loneliness, with the scorn of his fellow citizens, with a reputation of obscurity and gloom that followed him beyond the grave. And yet, across the centuries, his broken words still reach us, still unsettle us, still call us to wake from our sleep and truly see the flowing world. In the end, the weeping philosopher gave us not tears, but fire, a light by which to face the impermanence of all things.
Heraclitus died as he lived, a solitary figure misunderstood by almost everyone around him, and yet the fire he kindled in the mountains above Ephesus has never gone out. He taught us that we cannot step into the same river twice, that everything we cherish is already flowing away from us, and that beneath the endless change there runs a hidden order, a logos that we can glimpse only if we are willing to wake up and truly listen.
His life reminds us that the deepest truths are often the loneliest, that to see clearly is sometimes to weep, and that the courage to face impermanence is one of the highest forms of wisdom a human being can attain. He surrendered a crown, retreated into silence, and poured his soul into a book that time itself broke into fragments, and still, across 2,500 years, those fragments burn. If his words have stirred something in you, perhaps it is because you too have sensed in some quiet moment that everything is flowing, that you are not who you were, and that within this flowing world, so fragile and so fleeting, there is nonetheless a fire that is holy and a beauty worth loving with your whole heart.